right. I'm still here with Kevin Swanson. This is still the True Presbyterian podcast, and it's after the interview now. So, this is where the really kind of interesting conversations often happen. And so, for those of you that were listening at the beginning, you'll know that I mentioned that Pastor Swanson actually ran for governor in Colorado, and he also ran for Senate in 1998. So his Colorado governor run was 94, Senate run was 98. So what in the world was that like? Because that, from my, this side of the microphone, that sounds awful.
Well, I was student body president of my university in the 1980s, so that was you know, an interest of mine. I think I was influenced largely by Francis Schaeffer and some of his stuff in the mid 80s.
Okay.
And by 1986, I ran for student body president of California Polytechnic State University and won the race. And so I ran against five candidates, but by God's grace, it was a miracle. I wound up winning and served as student body president of a university with some 17,000 students. And so I always had something of an interest in influencing society, and I think I was always caught in the tension of separatism versus Puritanism, the idea of should you separate from society or purify your
Mm-hmm.
systems, and I think as Christian leaders, Christian pastors, we have to appreciate the tension there. There is a bit of a challenge as to how much we can. I think I'm increasingly more in the state where it seems that we are offered certain opportunities on islands. We're not able to really affect the macro culture as much as we used to. But it's always a full court press. It's always, okay, well, let's influence what we can, and then we'll press forward into other areas of life later on. So I think my approach to Puritanism is somewhat more measured today than it was 25 years ago. But I was still interested in
Okay.
bearing something of a strong influence upon politics in 1994 when I ran for governor. I'd been married for, I guess, 4 years at that point. We had a 3-year-old son and a 1-year-old daughter. I was 30 years of age. I could barely
Mm.
qualify. In fact, I just turned 30 in June. That was the qualification to be governor of the state of Colorado. So I was probably the youngest candidate ever to run for governor. I looked like I was 14 years of age, which was somewhat of a drawback because, I had a hard time getting people to realize I was 30 years of age and I'm a competent person and I probably could do a fairly good job governing the state. But as it turns out, both candidates, Republican and Democrat, were pro-abortion and very, very outspoken pro-abortion candidates that wanted government to pay for abortions, and they
Interesting.
just, yeah, they had a huge commitment to abortion. And so the Republican and the Democrat were both very lousy, and I was influenced largely by Dr. James Dobson at the time, who telling everybody I would vote a third party. I will never vote for a person who would sentence an innocent child to death. So that was the kind of language I was hearing from James Dobson. I was committed to that position, that pro-life position, and saw that the Republicans were largely rhino in our state. And of course, as a Republican governor that had signed the
Okay.
first abortion law in the history of this nation in 1967, and that was the Colorado Republican governor, John Love. So Colorado had that very strong libertarian, anti-biblical position on social issues. That was
Sure.
Colorado. That was the Colorado Republican Party. And so there was a one House rep, one Senate rep, who was maybe two or three Senate reps who were pro-life at the time, and I hung out with some of these guys and got to know them and really tried to emphasize the pro-life position, saying, hey, as the Republicans, we really need to come back to commit to a pro-life position in this state. And I think I shook the cage pretty hard. Ran against the Republican, and Republican pulled out of the race, got discouraged. He was a drunk driver as well, which didn't help his reputation very much. And I wound up being the conservative guy debating Roy Romer, the governor, in various contexts. So it was Kevin Swanson versus Roy Romer towards the end of the race. Even though I was running on a taxpayer American
Hmm.
Constitution Party ticket, I turned out being basically the guy holding up the conservative flag. The Republican backed out of the race, and I wound up getting 4% of the vote, probably more vote than any third party had ever received in the history of Colorado. And I think it was worthwhile. I think at the end of the day, I was able to shake up the Republicans. And throughout the 1990s and on into the thousands, we began to see way more Republican commitment to pro-life issues. So I was thankful for that. I did my little bit to, be sure that the pro-life flag was being waved, and that the Republicans, at least at the very least in the state of Colorado, were moving more towards a pro-life position.
Outstanding. Well, folks, that's going to do it for after the interview. And once again, Pastor Swanson, thanks for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Hutch.